So, quick review first of all, before we get into the non-disjunction stuff. Meiosis has two purposes: to create haploid gametes, so that the number of chromosomes in our offspring are the same, generation after generation after generation. That's purpose number one. Purpose number two is to create genetic variation by means such as crossing over, independent assortment, and segregation. Meiosis occurs where? Testes or ovaries. And what cells does it occur in? Germ cells. And we know that haploid means what? One of each kind of chromosome. For you, how many kinds of chromosomes are there? 23. Diploid means two of each kind of chromosome. And for you, that means 46. And something else we need to know. We've talked about a karyotype before. What's a karyotype? It's a diagram that's basically a picture of your chromosomes arranged in what? Homologous pairs. We make that picture after doing what's called an amniocentesis. In an amniocentesis, they take a woman who's pregnant. Usually it's older women. They can do it in a young, but usually it's an older woman. They take a long needle. They go through her uterus to what sac? The amniotic sac, and they pull out fluid from that sac. In that fluid are some cells that have flaked off the baby. Skin cells mostly. They take those cells and they culture them in a lab, like in a petri dish. They grow them.
What was that lady's name?
The cancer cell thing you're talking about? Well, that's a little different than this. That was Helen's, and we call HeLa cells from Helen. That's a different thing. Here they're going to take those cells and grow them, and they're going to treat them with a chemical, the cells, so that they'll freeze in metaphase. Why would that be a good place to freeze them? It's where the chromosomes are nice and lined up and they're easy to see, right? They take a picture of that cell with a camera, put it on a microscope. Today it's done with computers, but used to they would literally cut out the chromosome off the film, off the actual print, and then line them up in pairs. Today it's done by computer. And we end up with something like this, a karyotype. We know they're pairs because they're the same basic shape, same basic size, and they stain the same way when you stain them. But what makes them homologous is that they have the same what on them? The same gene sequences. They control the same traits. But they may have different what? Different alleles, different versions of those genes. Is this a male or a female that we're looking at? It's a male, because the sex chromosomes are always put in spot 23, the 23rd pair. Those are the sex chromosomes. And he's got two different ones. If these two sex chromosomes, they may not be labeled, but if they're different shapes and sizes, that tells you it's a male. If they're the same basic shape and size, it's XX, it's female. What's the term for these other chromosomes? All these other 44. If they're not sex chromosomes, what's the word for them? Well, that's the cells. That's non-sex cells. Non-sex chromosomes have a different name. And this is a word you need to know. They're called autosomes. So in every cell in your body, you have 44 autosomes. 9 sex chromosomes plus 2 sex chromosomes. They're chromosomes that don't have anything to do with gender. Katie and I could have identical, well, they won't be identical, but they would be very similar autosomes. Sex chromosomes are going to be different. Sex chromosomes determine gender, autosomes determine everything else. 9 sex chromosomes, or autosomes. What we want to concentrate on, though, in this PowerPoint is what's called nondisjunction. And that's when, during meiosis, it doesn't happen the right way. Junction is joining, right? So non-disjunction would be what? Unjoining, right? Non-disjunction means they don't unjoin correctly. What doesn't unjoin correctly? The chromosomes, okay? So that some cells end up with what? extra chromosomes, and some cells end up with missing chromosomes. That's nondisjunction. When the chromosomes don't separate correctly during meiosis. Yeah, it's bigger than a mutation, because it's not just one gene, it's a whole chromosome. So nondisjunction is when the chromosomes don't separate correctly during meiosis, and you end up with cells with extra or missing chromosomes, and that's a big problem. That causes what's called aneuploidy. What's A mean?
Which one's the one?
21. Chromosome 21. What does the prefix A mean? Not or no? Turns out new means number, and ploid refers to like your number of chromosomes. So it's not the right number of chromosomes. A cell is said to have aneuploidy if it has extra chromosomes or if it has missing chromosomes. Either way, it's not the right number of chromosomes. That's what aneuploidy is. Not the right number. So any human cell without 46 is aneuploid. It has the wrong number of chromosomes. That can lead to all kinds of diseases and disorders, problems. But by far, what is the most common result of aneuploidy? Death, miscarriage. By far, the most common result of aneuploidy is miscarriage. What's probably second on the list? Well, Down syndrome is the most common other than miscarriage. And there are others. We're going to talk about several of other disorders that can be caused by this. Which one, what?
Which chromosome?
It's more than one. This growth kinds of things are spread out over several chromosomes. I don't know the
You
number.
mix it with water,
No.
it'll dehydrate.
Yeah, I know. It will dehydrate. Anyway, here, this is showing you that the nondisjunction here happened in meiosis 1. We're looking at just one homologous pair. These two should separate during meiosis 1 right here, right? One should go into one cell, one should go into the other. It didn't. They didn't separate. Both of these went into the same cell. Then meiosis 2 happened okay. The chromatids separated. These two ended up with an extra version of that chromosome. These ended up missing that whole chromosome. If they have an extra one, they're said to be disomic, which means they got two of a particular chromosome. Two of a chromosome. Null means what? None. None of that chromosome. So these are disomic. They have two of a chromosome, so they have 24 total. These are nullisomic. They have 0 of one chromosome, so they have only 22 total. If these two go out and fertilize an egg, this has one of that chromosome, this has 2, so that baby ends up being trisomic. It has 3 of whatever chromosome we're talking about. This one is monosomic. It has 1 like it's supposed to. This has 0. 0 plus 1 is still 1, right? So for that particular chromosome, it's monosomic. It ends up with 45 total chromosomes, but only 1 of that pair. This one ends up with 47 total, but 3 of what's supposed to be that pair. Either one of these is a problem. And almost always, they result in what? Death of that embryo. Yeah.
So what's the chance of that happening?
It's very, very, very common. Very common.
So it's man's fault.
No. This could be in the sperm. It could just as well be in the egg. It can happen either way. Just my diagrams happen to show sperm. It can happen in the egg too. Yeah, that's a good question. This can go wrong in the man or the woman. Just as likely in both. Now, us guys make a lot more deformed sperm than you ladies make deformed eggs. But that's simply because we do what? We make a whole lot more sperm than you make eggs. Okay? But the chances are about the same for it to happen to a sperm or an egg. It can go either way. Now, the problem can also happen in meiosis 2. Notice up here, meiosis 1 did what it was supposed to do, right? Meiosis 1's about separating what? What's meiosis 1 separate? Homologous chromosomes. These separated just like they're supposed to, right? Perfect. Meiosis 2 is supposed to separate what? Sister chromatids, right? Supposed to separate sister chromatids. Well, this one, it worked just perfect, right? This one, not so much. These went into the same cell. This one got none. So this one's nullisomic, none of that chromosome. This one is disomic, it got 2 of that chromosome. And these are monosomic, like they're supposed to be. They got 1 of each. If these 2 fertilize that egg, we're good to go, right? Disomic, like we're supposed to be. The embryo is supposed to be disomic, right? 2 of each. 46 total. These babies would be good to go. If this sperm fertilized that egg, that baby is missing a chromosome. It's monosomic, 45 total. It's probably going to get miscarried. If this one fertilizes that egg, it's going to be trisomic for that chromosome. It's going to have 47 total. It's probably going to get miscarried.
How long does the egg stay in there until
It depends. I mean, there's all kinds of factors that factor in. Usually it's really early. A lot of times even before the woman misses a cycle. But sometimes it can develop for months even before it miscarries.
So it could almost be like forming and it just
Dies right before birth sometimes. It's bad. Here are some results of nondisjunction. Like it says up here, by far the most common result is spontaneous abortion or miscarriage. About 2/3 of all pregnancies end in miscarriage. That's a huge stat. 2/3 of all human pregnancies end in miscarriage. We're lucky we were born, but that number seems really high because most of those miscarriages happen when? Before you ever knew you were pregnant. You would never know. And it just comes out as part of what you think is your normal menstrual cycle. But really it's not. There's a zygote in there. Now, out of that 67% of pregnancies, about 60% of those are because of this problem. So about 60% of 67% of pregnancies end because of this, nondisjunction. The zygote is either missing chromosomes or it has extra chromosomes. Either way is bad. Some other cases, though, where the baby are actually born are these guys. 3 chromosome 21s causes Down syndrome. That's pretty common. You're going to see these numbers vary a little bit depending on the source I get those numbers from. But somewhere about 1 in every 660 births is a Down syndrome baby. Trisomy 13, 3 chromosome 13s, gives you something called Patau syndrome, and we're going to see pictures of that in a minute. These are actually way worse than Down syndrome, these 2 are, way worse. Hold that just a minute and I'll get you. They're not as common, 1 in 5,000 births. Edward syndrome is really, really severe, trisomy 18, about 1 in 3,000 now. These guys not as severe, but psychologically kind of crippling, some of these are. Klinefelter syndrome is when the sex chromosomes don't separate right. And you get, the baby ends up with an X, an X, and a Y.
Dude, I heard about it.
Not hermaphrodites, but they have a Y chromosome. If you have a Y chromosome, you are what? You are a male. But they're feminized males. What I mean by that is, how do I want to put this gingerly? They're underdeveloped, let's put it that way. See where I'm going with that? Underdeveloped. In one area, they're underdeveloped. In another area, a little overdeveloped. Okay? So what I mean is, their male reproductive parts are small, really small. And they tend to develop breasts. And they sort of are kind of curvy like a woman. Okay? And usually,
So what would you be technical?
you're a man, but yeah, kind of girly now.
What is a girl that?
It can't be. You got a Y chromosome, you're a guy.
No, but I saw this episode of House where like this girl, she had, I think something like that. She was going around messing around with men, but she was technically a dude.
Now that's a different deal. That's that thing we talked about at the beginning, probably the androgen insensitivity, where she had a Y chromosome, but her testosterone receptors weren't working right, so she looked like a woman. Okay, these guys are guys. They might have some breasts, but they're still guys. And usually they're also mentally retarded to some extent, or at least slow, what we call slow, maybe LD.
And they're a little retarded.
Notice it's pretty common. 1 in 500. There's over 500 guys at this school, right? Odds are you probably met somebody with Klinefelter syndrome. Okay? Odds are you probably know somebody. Turner syndrome is when, again, sex chromosome problem, but these children only end up with an X. 0 means they're missing that other one. They're nullosomic. They're missing, they just have one sex chromosome.
So what are
You're female, okay? You look like a female, but with Turner syndrome, we'll see the symptoms in a second. These women tend to be really, really short, like, here maybe. They tend to have this band of tissue that runs from somewhere around their ears down to their neck. It's called the webbed neck. It looks almost like a band or rope.
Can we see pictures?
Yeah, we can. It runs from here down to here, and there's sort of webbing in between that band and your neck. Kind of like the webbing between the ducks.
Sex
toes.
like
Now, I had never met anybody that I knew for sure had this until about 7 or 8 years ago. And in that year, I had this little girl who sat right here where Sierra sits, and I was teaching the same lesson. And I was pretty sure she had it, so I was walking gingerly with the way I taught it. And we were teaching this lesson, and she stood up in the middle of class. She said, "Yeah, I have that." And she explained to us the symptoms and what it did and all that kind of stuff. Most of the time you have chromosome problems, you get mental retardation. She did Turner syndrome, that's not true. She was the smartest kid in the class, made the best grade in the class, knew all the answers. But what it does cause, any of these sex chromosome problems, causes fertility issues. So these women with Turner syndrome are really, really short. They have the webbed neck issue, and also they tend not to ever, it looks like they never went through puberty. So the breast development, that kind of stuff doesn't happen. The curvy stuff never really happens. And they're usually sterile. Now, I said I never met anybody until that year that I knew for sure. That same day, or maybe the next day, the teacher that used to be across the hall, she doesn't teach here anymore, so I don't see her anymore. She walked in. She was really short, but I never thought of this. And she said she knew, she saw what we were doing on the board, part of the same slide, and she said, "You know, I have Turner syndrome too." Ooh. Now, she didn't have the symptoms that the girl had, which is telling me that probably what had she had done. She had some work done, okay? She had some plastic surgery, probably had the web neck thing corrected, and probably had some enhancements in other places, okay? So she didn't look like she had it, okay? But she didn't have any children because she couldn't, because of sterility. But there's no mental effects of Turner syndrome. Now, Jacob syndrome is sometimes called Superman syndrome. Okay? Now, that's a misnomer. Okay?
Superman.
Sometimes it's called Superman syndrome. These guys have 2 Y chromosomes. It's not something you want to have. Not something you want to have. Have you guys read Of Mice and Men?
Yes.
My guess is that character, Lenny Small in Of Mice and Men, probably had this. Okay? Big, strong. Now, I'm going to be really stereotypical here. I hope I don't offend anybody. These would be your stereotypical offensive linemen, okay? These big, strong guys who are kind of slow, not real smart, okay? I'm not saying all offensive linemen are big and dumb, okay? But I'm just saying stereotypically, these would be your big, dumb, strong guys, okay? Got 2 Y chromosomes. Now, there's been some controversial research done on this. 2 Y chromosomes probably means a little extra weight. A little extra testosterone. Okay? Testosterone, it turns out, doesn't make you smart, guys. It makes you stupid. Okay? It makes you aggressive. Okay? It makes you aggressive. It makes you big and strong. It makes you aggressive. There was a study done a few years ago of prison populations. And guess what they found out about this disorder in prison populations? It was really, really common in prisoners. Okay? That testosterone makes you do stupid stuff. Okay? You got an extra testosterone, so it makes them extra stupid. Now that study has been called into question and varied, but there are some people who think that these guys are sort of programmed to be hyper aggressive because they've got 2 doses of testosterone to some extent. But it's not that uncommon. Notice it's 1 in 1,000 male births. You probably know somebody with this too. Probably at least met somebody with this. This one's not as common. You may not know anybody with that one. Because probably what most of the time happens to these embryos, since they're missing a chromosome, they probably die most of the time. Okay? But these two are pretty common, Klinefelters and Turners. Key thing though, what did you not see up there?
Two X right.
You don't see somebody with just a Y. The Y chromosome is a little bitty chromosome that basically just says make testosterone. The X chromosome has something to do with your gender, but it also has a lot of other important genes on it. You cannot live without an X chromosome. Everybody has to have an X. That's why there's no Y0. You have to have an X chromosome to live. I'm getting there. Now notice these stats here are a little bit different than the stats I had on the last slide because the sources are saying different things. But just in general, here's some small descriptions. Down syndrome, we know there's mental retardation. They've got that wide, flat face. I mean, you can look at somebody and tell they have Down syndrome. It's pretty obvious. Their upper eyelid has a weird little fold in it. It's got an extra fold in their upper eyelid up in here. They're usually short. And one of the first things a doctor will do when a new baby's born is he'll look at their hands. And he'll look at the creases in your hands. People with Down syndrome have this wide crease that basically goes straight across. It's like a ditch going across, all the way across, straight across. None of you in here have that, I promise. But instead of kind of angling like this one does on my hand, there'll be a deep one that'll go pretty much straight across. So they look at newborn babies and they can tell just by looking at their hands most of the time if they have Down syndrome or not. I mean, straight and deep. Yeah, it's more in the middle. More in the middle of the hand.
So, will they not have a child as
Unless they did an amniocentesis, probably not. Now, if they did one of those amnio tests, yeah, they would. They don't do those on most people. They usually only do those amnios on the older women. Not just yet. They probably would. They can, but the chances in the younger women are really, really low. Patau syndrome. Patau syndrome is the extra chromosome 13, trisomy 13. Notice what this causes. Malformed internal organs, which means your organs are not made, they're out late. They may be in the wrong place, completely in the wrong place. The face is malformed. There's all kinds of face deformities. The head is deformed. The head's just not made the right way. You have extra digits, which means extra fingers and toes. And severe mental retardation. These babies tend to live not more than a few weeks at most. They typically die very quickly. Strange. I don't know. Edwards syndrome is very similar to Patau syndrome. It's an extra chromosome 18, but notice malformed internal organs, misshapen face, misshapen head, extreme muscle tone. Those babies come out like they're posing, you know. It's like their muscles are tightened all the time. Okay, that kind of thing. It couldn't be uncomfortable. But again, both of these two, usually these babies don't make it more than a few months after birth. So they've got serious issues. Turner syndrome, we already talked about, that's just an X chromosome, X0. They're very short. They've got the webbed neck. They're usually a broad chest, the chest is kind of built like a man, kind of wide across the chest. No real breast development, no sexual maturity. They're just going to be sterile. Klinefelters, again, the breast development usually happens in a guy. The testes are underdeveloped. They usually don't have to shave. That would be one nice thing about having Klinefelter's disease. But they can be sterile. They can have reproductive problems. I was watching an issue of an episode of House the other day. This was on House. This guy, this is a weird situation. No, the Klinefelter syndrome. This guy, the House stuff is pretty much always based on fact. The guy was about 60 or so, and he didn't know he had anything wrong with him. Now he was built kind of weird. He had a big old belly, which wasn't unusual, but he kind of had some man boobs going on too. He's 60, so nobody thought too much about that. And he had 2 daughters. Now that makes sense with this, right? Because we said these guys are typically sterile, and their parts are a little small and don't really work right. But this guy's been married for like 30 years. Okay? So nobody thought too much about it when they came in. They kept trying to figure out what was wrong with him. Well, it turned out that I guess his wife had figured out something was wrong, and they never really talked about it. And she had been messing around, and his kids weren't really his kids, okay? His kids were somebody else's kids. He didn't know that, okay? And he found out that he was kind of female-ish, and that his kids were his kids all in the same day, okay? Wouldn't have been a good day, okay? Wouldn't have been a good day. Yeah, if you gotta have a chromosome problem, this next one is the one you want to have. If you gotta have a chromosome problem, triple X. Okay, these guys are like XXX, 3 X's. Well, it turns out they don't cause too many problems. These women tend to be very tall, very thin. The only problems they have are some menstrual problems. They don't have cycle very often, which a lot of you women would probably think that's good. Okay.
What is it about when you start talking about what is this stuff?
No, it can be a lot of times it's weight related. But regardless, guys, hear me on this. This can be 3 X's, it can be 4, it can be even 5, and typically it doesn't cause any problems until it's time to start having a baby. If you want to have a baby, you're not sterile, but the chances of your baby either getting this or this would be really high, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're doing meiosis, your eggs are either going to get, half your eggs are going to get 2 X's and half are going to get 1 X, right? Which means if that 2X egg meets up with a normal Y sperm, then your baby ends up this. If that 2X egg ends up with a normal X carrying sperm, your baby ends up with this, okay? So if you got to get one of these, that's probably the one you want to get, okay? But there's still some downsides.
Have you ever met one of those people that?
You never would really know.
No, I thought you met any of the people.
Yeah, I mean, I've met some people that I had a feeling were probably that way, but then nobody's ever told me I got to talk up. So.
You mean they're kind of feminine? Do you mean like?
I mean, they look sort of. I'm not saying they're gay. Okay, I'm saying that they look feminine. They're built sort of like a woman. They're not, wide chest, muscular kind of guys. They're a lot more body fat than a normal man would have. A lot more body fat up top than a normal man would have.
You can work that out.
They can do some surgery, but yeah, no, I don't think the working out would help a whole lot. Yes.
Can I use it on stream?
We're almost finished. That was about the ring. Jacob syndrome. Like we said before with Jacob syndrome, they're taller than guys, they're big guys. Jacob syndrome are big guys, they tend to be muscular, they have really bad acne problems, they tend to have speech problems. Of my men, Lenny Small had a kind of stutter, right? Learning problems, really kind of slow, what we might call LD, learning disabled. And they're typically XYY, not that uncommon. Now I want to show you some pictures here in a second. Here's the more on the Turner syndrome thing.
That's the word for it?
This is the one that's X0, the girls with the webbed neck and stuff. And notice what it says here. Typically sterile. They have short stature, defective development of the gonads, the ovaries in this case. Extra skin around the neck, sometimes called a webbed neck. No evidence of mental retardation. But these girls are X0. They only got 1 sex chromosome. Edwards syndrome is sort of like trisomy 21, sort of like Down syndrome because it causes mental retardation. But in these kids, I always said before, and I don't know that I mentioned this before, they have really low set ears. Instead of their ears being where they're supposed to be, they're like way back here, like way back. Okay?
Crocker.
I don't know, I'll show you a picture. Their fingers tend to be deformed and they tend to have extra ones. Their nose is really narrow. Sometimes it's even missing. And they have a receding jaw, which means instead of their jaw sticking out a little bit, it's way back here. Their jaw is way back this way. Receding jaw. And they tend to have heart problems. Their heart's just not made the right way. It may be in the wrong place even. Patau syndrome. Patau syndrome causes really severe mental retardation. The babies tend to have a cleft lip or cleft palate, which means there's like a big gap in their lip. And their palate's the top of your jaw, right? The top, inside of your top of your mouth, that's open, which means your mouth opens into your nose. That's bad, right? There's no division between your mouth and your nose.
You can get that fixed.
You can get it fixed, but with these babies, that's the least of their worries. They got other serious issues. Again, their ears tend to be low set and deformed. They have breathing problems, and their heart tends to be not made correctly. So both Patel and Edwards, they tend to die very quickly. There's a picture of a baby with Patel syndrome. So notice that basically what's supposed to be its nose is way over here. Its eyes are basically just slits. They're not even really there. Here's where its nose ought to be.
How long did they die?
Just
before they
open.
died?
Not long, usually days, weeks. Its ears, you can't really tell, but they're way back in the back. His head has a funny shape to it.
Is it true that you get your baby comes out, you shake the head and you want it?
No.
No.
Can they check their head?
Now, their heads do change shape as they're coming out the birth canal, but then they usually go back to normal.
Some of them.
Now, here's a baby with Patel syndrome. Notice all the cleft palate and cleft lip up here going on.
You're like,
Remember, Edwards syndrome is an extra chromosome 18. Everything else is normal up here. This would be a guy, right? Because here's a 23rd set of chromosomes, XY. But this can happen in girls too. It has nothing to do with sex. It has to do with having 3 chromosome 18s. All right, the last thing we'll mention here, Down syndrome. For Down syndrome is also called trisomy 21 because you have 21 chromosomes. We know that mental retardation is obviously there. You may not know this, but people with Down syndrome tend to have heart problems. They tend to die fairly early. You don't see a lot of old people with Down syndrome. They die usually 40s, 50s.
what's the web next?
Well, Turner syndrome? No, Turner, yeah, I'll find a Turner's. Yeah, I'll find a Turner's. I'll have to look it up. They also have a lot of gastrointestinal problems, like digestive tract problems. And typically, you know, that people with Down syndrome, they have to be cared for most of their life. They typically aren't mentally capable of taking care of themselves on their own. And that's where that ends. Now, I want to do one other thing. I told you we were going to do the fruit flies on Friday. So I want to very briefly talk to you about